Since 2009, he has been working as librarian and assistant professor at the conveniently close Georgia State University. And he holds 2 history degrees, one from Appalachian State University, North Carolina, and a master's degree from Western Carolina University.
Yep, that's right, yeah.
And yeah, so here's his talk today.
Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoy it.
All right, well, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to talk about this project that we got going on at Georgia State. So let me just pull up the PowerPoint here. All right, yeah, so I'm going to talk about this Georgia State Digital Library project that we have going on right now. It's called Planning Atlanta. I don't know if anyone has visited the site or played around with it. I'm not seeing any heads nodding, so then this will be a treat, I think, for people, especially because you guys are, studying city planning. This is what this is all about. So this is something that I hope you guys will find useful. So I think my talk today will probably be a little bit different than most of the talks that you guys have in this seminar, because I'm not really going to talk about my research. While I do consider this a research project, I'm not really going to talk about my research aspects of it, but I'm more going to talk about how you can use the Planning Atlanta collection, like for example in your research, and how it can be used to better understand Atlanta's social and built environment. So what is the Planning Atlanta collection? It's a lot of things, but I like to describe it as a dynamic digital collection that encourages new perspectives on Atlanta. And about a year ago, we received funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, which we are incredibly grateful for, because this really helped us expand the scope of the project. It started off as just a map project, and then we wrote this big proposal, and it got funded. So now we have all of this other material that's going into the collection. So we're in the first year of a 2-year grant. So if you guys go to the Planning Atlanta site right now, just remember that it's in development right now. There's not all the content is available, and there are some known issues with the site, but we have a full year to work those out. So that's a little bit about what the collection is like conceptually. But obviously it's a digital library collection, so it's made up of content, right? And it has a lot of content in it, and all of this content is related to city planning in Atlanta and metropolitan Atlanta. So if you just look at some of the items that are in the collection or that will be in the collection, there's going to be over 3,000 georeference maps. And those of you who use GIS, you'll know what a georeference map is. Basically, we're putting geospatial properties into the map, like digital geospatial properties, so you can use this in ArcGIS. You'll be able to use these in the maps in Google Earth and Google Maps. So it's really making these maps useful for research and for teaching. Something that I'm really excited about is this demographic data set, which is something that very few people know about unless you've been around for a long time. Chances are you never heard of this data set unless you work at the Atlanta Regional Commission. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is something that I really want to see people use. So I think there's really good potential with it. We're going to have like over 300 planning publications that we're digitizing, all from the City of Atlanta Regional Commission, and some other entities in and around Atlanta. Just specifically, these are planning proposals, documents about planning, just really good information. Another thing we have in the collection are all of these photographs. So at Georgia State, we have the Atlanta Journal-Constitution photograph collection, which is, I don't remember the number. I want to say like over 5 million photographs. It's probably even larger than that. It's just unbelievably large. So what we're doing is we're going through, and we're not going through everything, that's impossible, but we're going through the ones that are somewhat organized and pulling out the ones that depict a lot of the planning activities that are portrayed on the maps and in the planning publications. So, you know, when you have an urban renewal map from the 1960s, we have photographs of, for example, Buttermilk Bottoms. So you'll be able to see, you know, the map of Buttermilk Bottoms. There'll be some documents that talk about Buttermilk Bottoms, and then we have photographs that show you what Buttermilk Bottoms looked like, you know, before the neighborhood was, you know, torn down through urban renewal, and what it looked like during that process and potentially afterwards. And then another really exciting component of that photographs, you know, project, these are all kind of sub-projects within this large collection, is that, so for the photographs, when we got this NEH funding, we're like, oh, this is great. Then we have graduate students researching the photographs, and what they're doing is they're going, if the photograph has a date on the back of it, they're going into the microfilm collection and looking up that photograph to get more information about it so they can describe what's actually being depicted in that photograph. So we reached out to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and we said, hey, you know, we have digital microform scanners. When we get a photograph, when we find that article that's associated with that photograph, can we scan the article and include it in this collection? And to our absolute amazement, they said yes. So this is really going to give you some excellent contextual information about the photographs and just in general about planning activities in Atlanta. And then we're going to collect some oral histories from some different neighborhoods, and we have this really exciting 1949 aerial mosaic project that we're updating, georeferencing all of those, stitch them together as one unified overlay, so you can view Atlanta as it existed from aerial photographies in 1949. It's going to be very exciting. It's going to come online, I think, within a month. So it's going to be good. And then the newest addition to this project, this is going to continue to grow even after the grant period, is this, we got about 700 sheet maps of tax district maps of Atlanta from the 1930s. This was a Works Progress Administration project. We actually partnered with the City of Atlanta Watershed Department. They have a lot of maps there. And so we've scanned all these. We're going to put them out, make them available. And what's so great about this is that it lists the address of every single house in Atlanta in the 1930s, every single building, which is pretty hard to come by. So it's pretty nice. All right, so that's all about the material. So I really think that this collection is more than just a collection of content. It is something. I think that the Planning Atlanta project is really something that is an example of what's called generative scholarship. And anyone heard of this? Right. No, not too many people. So this is a brand new concept. You know, what's behind the concept has been around for a while, but Edward Ayers, if anyone knows of him, he is kind of the pioneer in digital humanities. He is currently the president of the University of Richmond, and he did some really early digital humanities projects, and he gives talks all the time about digital humanities and has a lot of really interesting projects. And so 2 years ago at EDUCAUSE's annual conference, he gave a talk, and he really came up with this idea of generative scholarship. And in that talk, it was basically a call to have more projects that are generative scholarship. And in his call, he kind of defined what generative scholarship is. And I'm just going to read the first part of this quote because I think this is the most important part. So what Ayers said is, we need digital spaces built around significant questions important for knowledge creation and excellent for teaching in many contexts. And this next part I think is very important. They can sustain original discovery by thousands of students, each of whom will see a unique pattern in complex evidence. So this Planning Atlanta collection, I really do think that it is a form of generative scholarship because this can sustain so much research. Students, researchers can go to this collection, and just because there's so much content that's all related, they can look at different aspects of planning in Atlanta and come to their own conclusions. And I think that this collection, it really is built around a significant question, and that question is basically how was Atlanta shaped and reshaped during the 20th century? And for those of you really familiar with Atlanta, it was significantly reshaped in the post-World War II period, and even today. I mean, all urban environments are, but Atlanta for sure was radically transformed. So that's enough about kind of the theoretical background of the project. So let's actually get in and look at the collection and see some of the material that's available for everyone to look at. So if you went to the Georgia State Library homepage and you clicked on digital collections, you would have a lot of different options for digital collections, but if you selected the Planning Atlanta collection, you would get to this, what we call a landing page. And you could search up there in the search box. You could search all the content that's available right now. Or you could go to these individual sub-collections. So let's say you're only interested in city planning maps. You would click on city planning maps, it would take you right to it, and any one of those images would take you to those different collections. Just as an example, let's start with, let's go into one of these, and let's say you looked at the city planning maps, because this is really where this whole thing started. We discovered we had all these city planning maps that were uncatalogued in the library, and the second I saw them, I knew we had to do something with it, and then I discovered we had all this other content in the library that was just amazing. So if you say you clicked on the city planning maps, and then you looked through some of the different maps. Let's say you came across this map right here, you thought it was interesting, which is a 1952 land use map of Atlanta. This is a map that I talk about a lot for many different reasons. It's appealing to a lot of people because, first of all, it's very colorful, it's very pretty. It is like, for our cartographic design, it's pretty nice. It's actually a hand-colored map, but that's not, I could care less about how the map looks and about how beautiful it is. Really what I care about is the information that's displayed on the map. And so this map right here, from 1952, this is significant for many different reasons, but it's significant in that 1952 was the year that Atlanta annexed a large portion of the surrounding area. And there are a couple smaller annexations after 1952, but that's basically what the city looks like today. There's a little bit more property down or area down on the bottom side there. But so what you can see in this map, this area around there is really where Atlanta was built up, and then all those other areas where you see basically nothing, that was a lot of what was annexed. So before I get into really talking more about the map, I'll just tell you about the collection. So we wanted to make all this material in the collection as accessible and as useful as possible. So obviously that meant we were going to georeference the maps to make them useful so you could display their geospatial properties. And we wanted to give people maximum access to all of the material. So you could download where it says download. If you clicked on that, you could download a full resolution JPEG of the map. And then if you clicked on where it says GeoTIFF, you would download the GeoTIFF. So you could just bring that into ArcGIS or QGIS, whatever you're using, and do sophisticated analysis using the map, extract some layers if you wanted to. You can open this map in Google Earth. Just click on that button. And then let's say you're teaching, you want to show this map in a class, and you're in your classroom, you have no control over your computer unless you brought your own. I'd be willing to bet that that computer does not have Google Earth on it, probably it doesn't have ArcGIS on it. So it was very important that we had these maps we be able to open in a web browser, like in Google Maps, so that anyone, you don't have to ask your IT staff to install a program on your computer. So you can just click on Google Maps and that'll open up. And I will say I'm very thankful for our web programmer, Chad Nelson, who figured out how to do that. So it's a large team, and we all learned a lot of stuff together. So okay, so let's say you clicked on that map, you viewed it in Google Earth. I just have screenshots of Google Earth, so that's what I did. So this is the map, 1952 land use map, opened in Google Earth, zoomed into the area just south of downtown, which we all know is where the Turner Field area is, Summerhill and Mechanicsville on the other side there. And I cropped the legend. I just superimposed the legend over there just for this demonstration, so you could see what the different land use is there. So I brought up this map just to give you an example of how this material, why it's significant and how it can be used for research and for teaching and to make pretty important points. So if you look at the legend, you'll see that green represents single and two-family residential, basically homes. Orange represents apartments, and red represents businesses. And so if you look at kind of the center of this map here, just south of downtown, like where it says Capitol Homes, you'll see that is a pretty mixed-use area. You have a definite mix of apartments, single-family homes, and business, all right next to each other. And that's something that, obviously everyone in this room would know much more about than myself, but I think that's something that people tend to view as desirable now when you live in cities. You want to live close to something where you can maybe shop, go to the market, you want to have different housing options. And that definitely, in 1952, that was, from just looking at this map, that was that area. And I've talked with people who lived in that area, before the stadium came in, and they have fond memories of being able to walk to the market and things like that. And so what you could do with these maps, you can, because they're in Google Earth, you can change the transparency, so you can see how things have changed over time. So I'm just going to change the transparency. If you kind of focus on that center area, you'll see that basically, I'll do that one more time. Where that large concentration of the mixed use was, that entire area was eliminated with the Fulton County Stadium, which is now Turner Field, and then the highway interchange there, which is simply enormous. So all that mixed use area was torn down through highway development and urban renewal, and later the Olympics. So if you you may want to ask more questions. Well, how did that happen? You can look at some more detailed maps from the collection. So this is the area just to the west of the stadium, where the stadium currently is now. This is the neighborhood Mechanicsville. So these are some maps from the 1960s, very early 1960s, I think, of these are urban renewal maps. So you're looking at land use maps, and then this map right here. I know you can't read the legend, but this is showing, it's depicting the structural conditions of buildings. And if you see a solid circle, that means that the city planning department, in all their wisdom, deemed these buildings as structurally unsound to the degree that they should be torn down. Yes?
So I'm just trying to think of how these things might be filed so you can find them. Is there a longitude-latitude coordinate that I could query, and then all these maps that covered that point?
Yes, that
would show up?
So that is not available right now, but we have a team of graduate students georeferencing these, and they're pulling, as part of a metadata field, they're taking those coordinates, and then eventually what we want to have is a spatial search component to this collection. So right now you can just do like a keyword search, and you can type in like Mechanicsville or urban renewal, and those maps will come up. But because we have the metadata, once we already have a couple of platforms that we know of that we can just put these maps in there, put those metadata fields in there with the coordinates, and you'll have like a bounding box. And then you zoom in, the closer you get to the area you want, on the side it'll bring up all the maps that fit that parameter. So, but that's not available yet. That is a feature that I want to come at some point. Yeah, it will come. We just have to get more funding for that. Yeah. So, if anyone has a lot of money, we can talk afterwards. So, and then here are some more maps. At the neighborhood level, same Mechanicsville. Pretty interesting. Where this one over here, the areas that are out in there, these are areas that are going to be cleared, or that the city planning department said that they should be cleared, like totally bulldozed. And then here is a redevelopment proposal, which you'd have to go in the collection and look at it more closely. But what I find really interesting about this is that there is virtually there's almost none, no commercial development there. There's just basically residential and a lot of public housing, which I find really interesting right here. It's all public housing. And if you look at this map today in the collection and you change the transparency, you'll see that's definitely not what went in there. So, and And there's a lot of different, it's really neat, there's a lot of, it's hard to see in this, the way this is projecting here, but there are a lot of little parks right there with baseball fields. This is the 1960s, and baseball was very popular, I think more popular than it is now. But you can see what city planners were thinking at the time, right? Even though a lot of these plans never came into being, it kind of gives you the city planning thought process of the time. Maybe more than the dominant one, because maybe the people with radical ideas did not really get to work at the city planning department. I don't know, but this is a record of kind of city planning activities and thought process. So you may be asking, well, why do they want to get rid of this mixed use area? There are many different reasons, but if you explored the collection even further and you looked in the publications, I'm sure some of you in this room are familiar with Now for Tomorrow, which was kind of, I guess, the second master plan, regional plan for Atlanta, the one that was more widely accepted. And in the beginning of the book, there's a quote about mixed use. And it says, in fact, there are many instances where land has been used for mixed and conflicting purposes, making unhappy neighbors of land users, which are basically incompatible. And I don't want to take this out of context, but it was more talking about industry being right next to residential areas. But I think you can think more broadly about really, the goal was kind of to compartmentalize land use. And so this other publication, which is one of my favorite publications in the collection, which is, I could talk about this forever, this one publication. I mean, just the title alone, Shall We Rebuild Again, really speaks to ideas of the day. So here's a quote from there. Land use, such as mixing uses which are not compatible, may promote blighted conditions. So this publication, I'm actually working on a paper right now about the concept of blight during the 50s and 60s, and this is just what they think leads to blight in this publication is just absolutely fascinating. And of course, mixed use is one thing that will lead to blight, according to this publication. So I know I'm talking about this one concept for a while, but I find it so fascinating. So this is just another example of some different content in the collection. We already saw this 1952 land use map. And sticking with the theme of mixed use, or basically land use, you can look at the 1952 example of land use in the area, and then this is the same area in 1978, and this is a city planning map depicting land use. And you can see that the land use imposed by the city is completely different, very compartmentalized, almost normalized, if you can say that. Yeah, so that's just one way that a student or a researcher can go and use this collection. That's just one of many, many hundreds or thousands of ways that people can get insights into how the city has changed over time. And so I'm going to move on now and just give a couple more examples of the maps and how the other material is related, and talk a little bit about some photographs. And then I'll end with talking about the data sets. And I'm not paying attention to time at all because there's no clock in here. So, all right. So this next image is a map from 1958. And you have to forgive me. As I said, my area of interest is the 1950s and 60s and early 70s. So that's what I'm using a lot of the examples of today. So this is a highway plan map of Atlanta from 1958, and I zoomed in really close here, and this is pretty close to the same area, just south of downtown. And you can see the highway is these dashed lines here, and you can see that the highway is going to come through Capitol Homes, which is public housing, and you would assume, right, that it's going to go through those buildings, that they're just going to demolish those buildings, which would be, that's a logical conclusion. So if you started looking through the photographs, you would find that we have this photograph in the collection that shows Capitol Homes. It shows one of those buildings, and from this photograph, I already know what's going on. So, but is it clear what's going on? Does anyone want to make a guess? Okay, so it's not clear, right? So you might look at the photograph and be like, okay, it's Capitol Homes, but what are they doing? But because, right, I said that we are, when we can locate the article that was associated with the photograph, we include that. And you can't always locate the article. Like someone wrote the wrong date down, or you just can't find it. But this one we did find. And here's the caption underneath the photograph. And I'm not going to read it, but basically they are moving those public housing buildings in one piece to a different location of the city, which is, I think, pretty interesting. I don't know how useful that is for research, but it's just an interesting little tidbit, I guess. And then moving on to another photograph, which is a group of people, right? We don't know much about it. I do know a little bit about it, but just looking at this, you wouldn't know that much about it, right? But you can see some people. I'm very short, so I can't reach up there very high. But like this lady doesn't look happy. But if you look at all the other people, they look happy, right? Especially this person right there, and there's a lady right up there, if you could see. She looks incredibly happy, right? So it's a happy group of people. So you want to know what they're happy about, right? What's pleasing them? So if we look at the article, this group of white people, this is from 1956, this group of white people is pleased to learn that so they've protested this, it says the caption here, La Vista Road residents protest Negro subdivision application. So basically that person who owned the land, who wanted to subdivide his property, just said, I'm not going to do this anymore. We have 400 people crowding the DeKalb County City Planning Commission office. And so this person's saying, I'm not going to do it. So that's why you have a group of what appear to be friendly people, but probably they're happy for not the best reasons. So this really gives you insights into planning in Atlanta, in the 1950s and through the 60s. So it's just a fascinating look. Some different things. So, and then this last image that I have here of the photographs, I had to get one in color that was more modern, right, more recent. So this is a photograph from 1990, and what you're looking at is residents. Clearly, they're looking at a highway proposal, right? This lady may be pointing toward her property. I'm not sure. But if we look at the publication or the article here, so that is those residents are looking at a proposal of what was called the outer perimeter. Anyone ever hear of that? So if you look at this image right here, it's hard to see, I know, but you can see the circle right there. So that's the 285 perimeter. And then this is a proposal for the outer perimeter, which is, if you look at that, it makes the 285 look incredibly tiny. So this is just fascinating to think about that proposal. And yeah, I mean, it was, still the 90s era of, need more highways, I guess. I don't know. Maybe we still are in that era. I don't know. And okay, so that was just some examples of the photographs and the maps and the publications. And okay, yeah, great, thanks. So I could go on and on about other things in the collection, but I'm not going to. But I'm gonna go on and on about one more element of the collection. This is the data collection that we have, the data sets. So this is that data set that I assume that most people had never heard of. And this is a Atlanta Regional Commission data set. And this is in the photo. I think I have most of the publications. So I'll give you a little background about this data set and why I find it so interesting. So when I discovered these maps in the library, I started researching it. I actually have a background in urban history, so I knew what the maps were when I saw them, but I started researching more of the specific activities in the maps. And I started, just going through the general collection, and I was looking at some publications, and I saw this row on the shelf, and it said, population and housing. And I looked at it, I was like, because I work with census data all the time, and I looked at it, and I was like, man, why is the Atlanta Regional Commission republishing census data every single year? I was like, that's just a waste of of paper, basically. Because if you're familiar with the way the census collects its data, so prior to 2000, the decennial 2000 census was just every 10 years. There was no American Community Survey. So when I looked at it, I was like, this is really weird. And I almost just like walked away and I was like, okay, whatever. But I, because I'm curious, I pulled one of these, some of these publications down and started flipping through them. And I realized that the Atlanta Regional Commission, I was new to Atlanta at this point. So I realized that the ARC was actually producing their own estimates of population and housing for Atlanta, from 1955 to 2003, and even still to this day. And so these in these publications are yearly population estimates down to the census tract level for all of metropolitan Atlanta, which is just absolutely fascinating. They have variables such as population by race, housing vacancies. It's not as extensive as the long form and or the American Community Survey. But still, this is a very unique data set, and it only existed in print from 1955 to 2003. There's no, digital copy. I think ARC, they scanned some for internal use, but they were just PDFs. So what we decided to do when I saw this is, man, I'm a big fan of census data information, so I was like, we got to do something with this. And I knew we had to extract the data. So what we did was we contracted, we partnered with this company called Geographic Research that produces a database called Simply Map. You guys may have access to it here, I'm not sure. And they actually extracted the data for us. So basically, this is what it looks like. This is a copy from 1962, again, with my theme from 1950s and 60s. This is an example of some of the different data tables in there. And as I said, the one that I'm most interested in is table 10, I believe. Yeah, population by race by census tract. And so I'll show you this. This is what it would look like. Just this is an image of the publication. All this great data, but when it's like this, you can't do anything with it. You can if you have a team of graduate students and like years working on this. So, but now that we contracted or partnered with Geographic Research, we have it available now for download in Excel and CSV. So you can manipulate the data. It's not an actual database. If someone wants to take on that project, that would be outstanding. But still, now it's useful, right? It's usable data. It's tabular data. It's not in a piece of paper or in a PDF. You can start manipulating this data. And now because it's tabular, right, we can bring it into ArcGIS. We can visualize this data. So what I have here is a very rudimentary map, right? This is not my best work by any means, but this is what I did was I took one variable for 1 decade from this data set, and this is the non-white population, which basically means the black population for the city, for all of metropolitan Atlanta at that time. So this is the black population in 1960. So before this data set was digitized, right, you would only have had access to the official census data. So you could only look at change over time, 10-year intervals, right? So it would look like this, 1960 and then 1970. Really huge expansion in where the black population lives in metropolitan Atlanta. So again, 1960, 1970. And those of you who have read Kevin Kruse's White Flight, you're already familiar with this concept of racial change during the 1960s. So, but now with this data set, we can get like a more granular look at change over time in Atlanta. And so we could actually isolate the years that that this significant racial change happened. Yes?
Can you orient us to downtown?
Yeah, sorry about that. So right here, this track, I believe, is downtown. Yeah, so basically the center of the map is downtown Atlanta. Like this is the Grant Park area.
That's DeKalb Avenue, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right here, right, yeah. So there's like Inman Park right there, and that's DeKalb, yeah, right there. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through this. I have maps for the 10-year period. So here is 1960, 1961, 62, 63. And then you'll see 1964, 65. Look at that change right there. So 1964, 65, 66, and 67. So really it was like a 3-year period where you had this incredible racial change in Atlanta, in the residential areas. And then you can see 68 and 69. While there was, some change, it wasn't as abrupt as those 3-year periods. And Kevin Cruz writes about this. And we also have other maps in the collection that depict this similar concept. But, and then you get to 1970. So I'm really excited to see people use this. I mean, just think about the different things you could do. You could look at, some housing elements for a long period of time in Atlanta. But it is important to note that this is not official census data. This is collected by the Atlanta Regional Commission. So it's sample data, yeah.
Have you, or has anyone compared it to census data yet?
I think so each one of these publications has like a methodology in it, and they tell you how they got that. And what they're doing is they're using building permit data and going to sites and things like that. But what they did every 10 years, they would use the census data as the base. So, but in between those years, I mean, how could you compare it, right? Because there's nothing to compare it to. Okay, so yeah, that's something I'm excited about. And if this is all open data, right? So you can go to the site. Click on population housing, and then you can download till you can't download anymore, I guess. So just in closing, I want to give credit to everyone who is working on this project. It's a big project, and there are a lot of people working on it. In fact, the funding that we got went almost entirely toward staff for this project. There's a lot of people power behind this. So. We have a lot of graduate students and other people in the library working on this. And we have excellent people working on this project too. So I have to say that this project could never be as great as it is without all these people working on it. So I always want to give credit to people. So yeah, that was basically all I wanted to go over with this collection. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
So you mentioned about geocoded data with more than 3,000. So can you explain what sort of data you geocoded?
So you're talking about the maps? So could you rephrase your question? What do you mean by?
So when I heard about geocoded data or geocoded map, I thought about point data or some kind of events throughout the Atlanta area. So
right. No, they're
interesting. What kind of data?
Yeah. So it's actually they're georeferenced maps. That means they just have geospatial properties associated with them. It's not necessarily geocoding. I know some people use those two words interchangeably, but it's not point data. Yeah, it's just a raster map that can be, viewed in its true location in a computer application. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry to disappoint you.
You mentioned, or your slides a while back, something about oral histories.
Yes.
Can you say about those? What are those? Like,
Yeah.
where they come from?
Right, so these are going to be new oral histories. We partnered, one of the co-PIs on this is a history professor, and she has a team of graduate students going out in some neighborhoods, making relationships with people in the neighborhoods, and we're going to collect oral histories. So because a lot of this content deals with, a lot of the maps that we have deal with urban renewal, and that's kind of an area that's not very well researched in Atlanta. And the people, because it took place during the 60s, 50s, and 60s, I guess in Atlanta really just primarily the 60s, those people are kind of getting older, and I thought that it would be a good project to look at a couple neighborhoods that experienced urban renewal and identify some residents that can talk about their experience in those neighborhoods during the urban renewal period. So the neighborhoods that we're going to collect oral histories from are Buttermilk Bottoms, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, but residents still meet every year from Buttermilk Bottoms and talk about, Buttermilk Bottoms and how it was like living there. Another one is Vine City. So that was a neighborhood that didn't undergo urban renewal, but there were pleads from Vine City residents during the 60s to get an urban renewal project there. And there are maps that were made that showed urban renewal, but nothing, to the best of my knowledge, was really ever executed. And then there's another neighborhood, Thomasville, which is not really well known, but that was one of the most successful urban renewal residential urban renewal projects in the country, actually. And in fact, we believe that I believe it was the first residential urban renewal project, and that it was not commercial development that went in there with urban renewal funds. It was all single family homes, and that neighborhood still exists today. So we felt like that was an important one to look at. And then we're also going to reach out to some people in Summerhill, because that is, such a interesting topic right now. So, yeah.
Are you familiar with any other city that is going through this type of digitizing, bringing all these urban histories into the computer or internet open form?
No, I'm not. I know that Seattle, like their city planning department, has some things that they digitized. Although I find it hard. I mean, they're not a library, so they digitize a whole bunch of stuff and put it up. I never know how to get to it though. So I'm not aware of that many other cities doing this. I would love for other cities to do this, but you'd have to have, like, a lot of times this material is not necessarily in a library. A lot of these maps, I'm not sure how we acquired these maps actually at Georgia State, but a lot of times these maps may be sitting in some city basement. No one knows about them anymore, if they even still exist. So no, I don't know of any other large-scale project. I will say this though, that to stay on that topic, so we have a lot of publications that are like urban renewal or city planning publications from other cities in our library, and you guys do as well at Georgia Tech. I would love, again, this would require more funding, but to digitize those as well, so you could start comparing, these city planning documents across the United States. And in fact, we have city planning publications at Georgia State from like England, some from Africa. It's fascinating that we acquired this material. So that's just a long-term project that I would love to work on. Okay. Yeah.
Is there a gap in material for a certain time period? And was metadata difficult to find for some of these materials?
Yeah, so we're creating all the metadata for all these materials by having students describe, what's going on in the maps. But what was the other part of your question? Are there gaps? Yeah. Yes, of course there are gaps. So, as I said before, a lot of this material is from like the urban renewal period, the 50s, 60s, and very early 70s. And there's so much content because as part of the urban renewal program, cities, if they wanted federal funding, had to produce all of this material, right? They had to do all these studies. So there's a lot of information there. In the 1940s, we have some stuff, not so much though. Even going back to the 30s, there's some WPA stuff, but before then, there's just not a good record. Emory has digitized this excellent map, 1928 Atlas of Atlanta. But prior to that, there's all these gaps. I know that maps exist, they're just hard to find. And then when you get into like the late 70s and early 80s, there's not as much material. And then when you get into the 90s, there's not much. We have like comprehensive city planning, reports. But other than that, so here's the problem too, that that people are becoming aware of now, that in the 90s when people were producing these maps, moved to GIS systems or digital systems, there wasn't as much of a print record. And so those things were saved on a computer, they were updated. You didn't save the original file, they were just modified, so that record is gone. They were on a computer that maybe didn't work anymore. The city planning department, more concerned with things that are going on right now, didn't see a need to archive that data, or libraries in the late 90s were not necessarily actively going out and collecting material like that. So there's a gap because it's digital information that it disappears. So yeah, there is definitely. I predict that there will be a major gap in knowing what the built environment was like from the 90s, probably even until like today, until people start collecting that data. Yes?
Is the gap still growing? Or?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, because I don't know of any library that's actively collecting this material, like from the city planning department or from ARC does a good job of keeping stuff, but I still think that they might, update files without saving the original. But I would love. I mean, there's only so much that you can do. So.
So let me float an idea and see what you think of it. So ARC is at a staff level compiling digital information like this
Yes.
now.
Yes.
If their staff want to come and use your library, my guess is that they can't get to the subscription-only services because you only provide those to your faculty and students.
As a guest, I mean, that's largely true. Yes.
That's true here.
Yes. Yeah.
And so their staff probably have no access to subscription journals.
Right.
Or virtually no access to subscription journals. And your library is not collecting the material that they're developing.
Right.
Why couldn't the Georgia State Library and ARC partner and swap services so that you get the entire collection they develop and they have access to your entire collection?
So, all right. So I'll let me think about how I can answer that. So we could collect what ARC produces without having to do an exchange. We just have to set that up, and that's something I'm interested in doing. It just costs us money, right? Because we would then be committing to preserving that data, and preserving digital data is far more costly than preserving print information. Now, as far as the exchange, we get something, they get something. We, as librarians, we're tied to, as you may have heard of this, publishers, and what they, in the digital subscription model, it is, I would just say, pretty much unfair, and they have most of the publishers have most of the power, and so they would almost certainly not be interested in that. They don't care what we get as a library in exchange. So that would be like, we would be offering something that a publisher produces to give to ARC, which the publisher wouldn't benefit from in any way.
So I asked the same question of our librarians here, and I got the same answer.
Yeah, I mean,
But I know that UC Berkeley and the Association of Bay Area Governments have exactly that kind of agreement.
oh really? So I'm not aware of that. So
ABAG staff get the complete use of the Berkeley Library in exchange for the Berkeley Library becoming a depository for everything ABAG produces.
well, we can talk about this afterwards because I'd be interested in seeing how they do that. Yeah.
I mean, because
California has.
solution to this problem that we're losing the data that's being.
Yes. Yeah. So I will say, California, their university system is organized in that regard, right? They can get together and they can challenge. It's such a heavyweight university system that they can get together and they can challenge publishers and get better deals. I should probably turn the mic off. I don't know. Than we can here. But I'd like to explore that. We can talk about this afterwards. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any environmental data for these years, and if so, which years?
So give me an example of what you would consider environmental data.
Water levels, water quality, air quality, things like that?
We don't. And my guess, this is just a complete guess, is that, that was probably not until the 70s when people were largely, this is a guess, right? I'm putting myself out there, just guessing that's when that data was, really beginning to, people were collecting that data. Is that a fair assumption with like Air Quality Act and things like that? So, yeah.
Later, but I thought that maybe water levels and water quality might have been something monitored.
So there are we do have some maps that show like flood areas and rivers and things like that, but nothing that documents. I haven't seen anything that documents, the quality of water or anything that today we would consider environmental, which is unfortunate. But I mean, that was not a major concern of most people at the time. Yes.
Is this going to have like the insurance company publications about individual buildings and conditions having to do with individual buildings?
No, it's basically whatever, we had that the city of Atlanta or Atlanta Regional Commission produced. The Sanborn maps are not in this collection. University of Georgia Library has digitized all the ones that they own, which is available freely now up until 1922. And then again, we're getting in, to copyright and publishers that Sanborn is still a company, right? And anything in the United States that was published after 1922, you can't put online without permission from the copyright owner. And Sanborn owns all those copyrights to those maps. So while we do have maps from Sanborn maps post 1922, we are legally not allowed to do anything with them. So that's unfortunate. That's, yeah.
So the other piece of this was eventually, could you take a parcel and follow it through time?
Okay, so I get that question all the time. Because at Georgia State, we have the Heritage Preservation Program, which is basically historic preservation. And that's something that the students do all the time. And they always come to me and they're like, I want a map of this area, this block, every 10 years from 1880 to now. I'm like, well, it just doesn't exist. Maybe it exists, but I don't know where they are, right? So it just, there was no thematic, there wasn't this entity in Atlanta that said, okay, every 10 years we're going to do a survey of the built environment. So you're basically left with what was ever produced at any given point in time.
But you could look, for instance, at zoning. You have all the zoning and the zoning changes over time, right?
We don't have all of them, no. I don't know how often the city updated the zoning maps, and we definitely do not have all those. So, we don't have a complete collection of everything that the city of Atlanta produced. Obviously, I'm sure there's a lot more material at the Atlanta History Center since they collected a lot of that city planning material, but I don't really know exactly what's there, and I really don't think that they did this every 10 years, and if they did, I'd be really surprised if that information was preserved, which is unfortunate, but that's, in any kind of digital humanities historical project, you're kind of left with Swiss cheese. That's what makes history, more of an art than a science. You just have to piece it together and do the best you can, which is what you have here. So, does that answer your question? Yes.
So I would like to know, besides of these mappings, do you have any other planning-related materials, like the record of the events, disputes, or discussions during the planning making process, or during the planning implementation process?
So you mean internal records?
Yes.
Again, we don't have that, and my guess is that the Atlanta History Center may have that, though I'm not sure, because they do have the official records of the city planning department. And then, the Atlanta Regional Commission, it was very good about keeping all their material, which is also housed at the Atlanta History Center. And they actually offered that they said, oh, you can digitize our whole collection. And I said, yeah, that'd be great, but it's an enormous collection, so that would be years, yeah. You can take that on if you like.
Time for a couple more questions.
Have you published yet out of this, your work or anything like that?
So I put out this paper in a library journal. It was just basically an overview of the collection and, how we
What do you think the
do it.
benefit is for this urban, what you're doing in terms of stitching together this urban history, connecting it with oral histories? What is the appetite and where's a good outlet for you to put that information as a journal article or a book chapter?
Yeah, so actually I'm working on a book right now based off a lot of this material with two geographers at Georgia State. And it's like a critical cartography book. We're looking at maps that shaped Atlanta, taking from a critical cartography perspective. And we're going to publish articles as we write this book, in Journal of Urban History and the Journal of Urban Geography, things like that. So but there is an appetite for this because there has been a really positive reception to this, I guess. People, specifically in Atlanta, are very interested in this, and I've gone all around the country and even to Germany and presented on this, and people seem to be very, very interested in this, interested in the built environment, and so of course I'm going to conferences where that's what people do. So yeah.
So do you have much data on the historical footprint of buildings?
Yeah, so it's kind of hit or miss. Again, some of these city planning maps, they definitely depict some of the building footprints. Some do not. So it's just hit or miss. So one thing that's really interesting is the WPA maps. While they don't show the building footprints, I should have just brought a scan of one of them to show you guys, but they show households and like land lots, and so you could see like where a building was. You could take the Emory's 1928 atlas, it was 28, and then these WPA maps were from like the mid to late 30s, and there wasn't that much activity going on because that was the Depression, right? There still was some development, but not really that much. So you could look at the building footprints on those maps, and you can look at like the addresses from this WPA map. So you could see like if you look at, I looked at the Fox Theater because it still exists today, but you could see on that WPA map that building had like, I don't know, I can't remember the number, but like 6 or 7 addresses right there in that building. So you can kind of get a sense of the density to a certain extent. So you can see a building and then how many individual addresses it had. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but okay.
Are you considering kind of like a living project? Like, I mean, I know that you need a lot, it's like a lot of work that goes into digitizing things, georeferencing, but like if, in 5 years somebody looks at the project and says, oh, well, I know where this whole missing part of something is. Here you go.
Yes, definitely. This is not going to end with the ending of the grant, in a year and a half. I would like to see this go on and partner with other libraries. Yeah, and definitely Georgia Tech, because I know you guys have material here. Yeah.
Can you set up a platform for crowdsourcing that fills some of these gaps? Then I'm thinking about the Beltline and all the iterations of the plan.
I know. See, yeah, you guys are great. You guys are thinking like librarians here. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely want to collect that material from the Beltline, and we have a contact there. It's just this is like taking up a significant portion of my life, and then we have another project going on at Georgia State where we're building this new data visualization center that I'm involved with. So there's just only so much that people can do, but I would like to set up systems where we're collecting the City of Atlanta data and we're collecting the Beltline data. Even if it's just like a PDF map that was a proposal, I definitely want to collect that. And I know that there are people working on the Beltline who are saving that information. We just need to reach out to them and get it and commit to preserving it.
I'm just thinking about like if there's something you can work with the city, like Code for America.
Right. Yeah.
Like do crowdsourcing. Like when I take pictures of all the developments along the Beltline every month, I'm walking my dog. Pin that and it goes right into your system of things along the Beltline pictures.
Yeah. So that's scary in that that's going to fill up really quickly. Like even though data storage gets cheaper and cheaper, there's a maintenance cost with it. So if we implemented something like that, there are a lot of unknown elements to that where who knows if you have the ability just to take a photo of something that you think is important, and then it goes in our system, it may be just like whatever. Someone dropped a quarter on the Beltline and someone thought it was interesting, and then we have it, and then it's a digital object that we have to preserve. So there would have to be some vetting. So the crowdsource concept is very good, I think, but there would definitely have to be some vetting of the information. Yeah.
I'm curious about long term, because you're talking about the 1990s as being ancient history.
Oh, I'm not. No, I'm not. Definitely not. I hope I didn't get that.
Digital information.
Okay. Yes.
How rapidly it's lost. And many of the technologies and standards that were in place at that time are really not in place anymore. So going forward 50 years, what does that mean in terms of how libraries are thinking about digital information and is there any difference between the way a library would think about this and the way that somebody in an office thinks about it?
Yes, definitely. There are differences, I think. And this is something that libraries are really, really trying to come to terms with. Libraries have always been about information, and I'll just give you a little spiel. Like, it's not about the format, right? Everyone thinks of a library as books. It's just that books, for most, for many hundreds, or for many centuries, have been the way that we've collected information. But now it's all digital, right? And so the digital transformation happens so quickly that libraries are trying to come to terms with how to collect and preserve that information. So when someone is producing information, like if it's a map, and there are tons of shape files, right? It's more difficult to preserve. If you guys are talking about, if you guys are familiar with shape files and ArcGIS, it's more difficult to preserve a shape file because that's not just one file, right? It has all these associated files with it, right? So it's more difficult to preserve that for long term than it is something more stable, like a finished map, right? That you produce in ArcMap and you save it as a TIFF image, which is an uncompressed file format. So it's more stable in that sense, right? But we know that we have to preserve the shape files. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, other than to say that it is.
It sounds like there's a problem, but there's really no solutions yet.
People are working on solutions. The challenge is that someone will come up with a solution, but then there are new file formats, right? So how do you preserve that?
Shape files aren't going to be the same over time.
Exactly, they're not.
You can access it and all of those kinds of
Yeah, so librarians are well aware of that issue. As we're talking about it, we need to reform library school. Like, we need to, people need to be learning how to do this instead of learning how to point someone toward, a reference book. That's, whatever. We don't need to do that anymore. We need to focus on preserving and working with digital information. So that's just my soapbox. Yeah.
Who's leading that?
Lots of people. In the geospatial community, there are geospatial librarians and geospatial preservationists looking at things like that. But there's just a whole bunch of different library groups looking at digital preservation.
A group that you could say, yeah, they're really.
Well, that's the challenge, right? So there are people focusing on different formats, right? Of course, Library of Congress is very interested in this, but I'm not a digital preservationist, right? So I'm reading up on it. I'm working on a digital project, so I need to be aware of this. But that's not my area. I don't have a background in digital preservation, but there are people who do. So there are entities out there that exist. Just off the top of my head, I can't tell you right now.
What is the name of your book?
Tentatively, we just started this project, right? So this is going to be a several-year thing, right? It's tentatively titled "Maps That Shaped Atlanta," although I'm sure that's going to change because that's not that interesting, right? But yeah. So we're actually going to give a talk about it. What's that?
You have a publisher?
No. We just the three of us got together and just came up with this idea actually in November. And if you guys know of the Atlanta Studies Symposium, have you heard of that? It's going on at Georgia State. We're going to give a talk on this, and I'm going to talk about blight and maps of blight and what that meant, and the unbiased nature of producing a map. So if you're interested, oh man, it is April. I should know that. It's like the beginning or mid of April. I don't know. We'll have to look it up. Just Google Atlanta Studies Symposium. It'll come up. Yeah.
Or send an announcement to Bruce. And
yeah. Yeah. And by the way, man, I'm just drawing blanks right now. Clarence Stone is going to be the keynote there, and Leanne Lands is also going to be giving a talk there. But so you guys know Clarence Stone. Excuse me, I had to edit that. He did several books, and a very important one, Regime Change. I'm getting the title wrong. I guess it's getting late, but exactly. Thank you. Yeah, he's going to be there. It's the 25th anniversary of that book, so it's worth it just to come to listen to him give the talk. So it's going to be exciting. Yeah. All
More
right.
questions? We look forward to the completion of the project.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe, for coming.
Thanks. All right. Well, thanks for having me.